Sarkar. If y'all remember, Raya was also at our Anti-Blackness in the South Asian Community pre-programming event, and Shmyla Khan was at our career fair last week. So welcome back to you both, and welcome Vikash and Roja. We're so excited to have you all. So panelists, if you could give a quick introduction of yourselves, pronouns, what you do, where are you right now, that would be great. We can start with Shmyla Khan if that's okay.
Hi, I am joining you guys from Lahore, Pakistan. I organize here. I'm a feminist organizer, and I guess, worn many hats. But yeah, I also work at the Digital Rights Foundation as the policy and research director. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And my pronouns are she and her, and I'll include that in my name as well.
Great. Vikash, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Vikash. I am a social worker practicing primarily in Texas. I currently am a full-time counselor with an organization called Daya Houston, which is a nonprofit dedicated to helping survivors and victims of South Asian domestic violence and sexual violence. So I operate as therapist, case manager, and then do some volunteer work for sexual violence response in collegiate communities on top of that. So yeah, nice to meet you guys.
Awesome. Raya, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Raya. My pronouns are they, them. And I am an attorney from India. And I currently live in San Francisco. And I work at the public defender's office in the city. And I am also an electoral organizer, and also I organized quite a bit in India as well when I used to live there. And I'm so happy to be here and excited for the discussions. Please feel free to ask questions whenever the question and answer session is. Cool, I'll pass it on.
Awesome. And last but not least, of course, Roja Singh.
Hello, nice to know that I'm last but not least. Awesome. I'm just so honored to be in the presence of such an esteemed panel, and you're all like so young. So thank you. I'm very flattered that you asked me to join you all. So I'm Roja Singh. I live in Rochester, New York, and I came here about 30 years ago for education, so on. So I teach sociology in St. John Fisher College, and I have been involved with Dalit human rights issues, especially Dalit women's sexual violence issues for the past 25 years or so. So I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So thank you all panelists. We're going to go ahead and open up the discussion with a few general questions. But we would, of course, love to have questions from participants as well. So as Nandini just put in the chat, if you'd like to ask a question, please direct message her and we'll ask you to unmute and ask your question, or you could ask one of us to share the question if you're not comfortable unmuting. So Maya, if you want to start off with the first question.
All right, so we want to ask each of the panelists more about why they're here today. So let's start off with this question. What inspired you to become an activist in the South Asian Me Too movement? Anybody can begin.
I can give a head start if that's okay. So I think for me, I know for sure that just being in direct visibility, being able to see directly the atrocities and the sexual violence that Dalit women were being subject to when I was 26 years old, living in a village in India. I had all my life lived a very privileged life in the city of Chennai. But then I moved after my marriage to this village. And when I directly saw that happening, you know, it just felt wrong not to get involved. I'm done.
I'll go next. I belong to a caste in West Bengal. It's called the Namashudra caste. And it is outside the Hindu caste system. So my community is considered untouchable. And when I moved to India, you know, when I was studying in India as a law student, I just experienced that, you know, untouchability at the nexus of untouchability and gender violence, like firsthand on a day-to-day basis. And it affected, you know, my access to justice, my access to resources, and my access to housing, my access to like who I can be friends with or who I can have sex with, you know, so not just my personal experience, I just, you know, but there's also like a class analysis to it. So I had it better than so many in my community who have been denied the opportunity for upward mobility. And I became a part of the Me Too movement because I felt that harassment in academia was like a huge reason why a lot of Dalit women were just like quit their studies and didn't feel safe and just like you know, are developed like, you know, a lot of trauma, which then like really affects their ability to kind of be functional and you know, do well for themselves. So it's you know, that's why I thought maybe, you know, I should like do something about it. I'll pass it to the next person.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go next. I'm trying to figure out how to make my answer as least involved and as concise as possible because it is, I could speak forever. I'm pretty sure most of us could on like why this is such a big thing. But there's two main things. I think one of the things was when I first started getting involved in social work, I've always been more oriented towards that. There's very much a niche category, first of all, of just South Asian mental health professionals. Then secondly, South Asian male mental health professionals. And then thirdly, South Asian male mental health professionals working DV, sexual violence, gender violence. And to be honest, there's just not enough men in this work. And there was like a huge, it's just, well, that was like a big thing that was lacking. And a lot of men not speaking out against like what, like the integration of privilege and toxic masculinity and how it contributes so heavily to this entire movement is a really, really, really big deal. And so I kind of found myself wrapped up in that through specifically volunteering for sexual violence advocacy in South Asian American circuits, like the collegiate level. And so the basically the thing that inspired me the most was seeing how many areas and voices that needed to be present weren't present yet. And I wanted to contribute to that. I knew that I have like enough of a niche position of, you know, not knowing or seeing anyone personally that has been doing the kind of work and like kind of stuff that I'm interested in, contributing to this voice and this movement. And so I was like, I just almost, one, out of obligation, and two, out of just pure necessity, I wanted to contribute to that and wanted to have something against that, because that's really what it comes down to. There just isn't enough men speaking out against this, and there just needs to be more. And I wanted to be one of those that helped with that, because I think it's absolutely necessary. And as a survivor myself, it's been trying to toe the line of like figuring out where that comes in and where to make that happen. So that's, especially within the last years, why I've gotten so heavily involved in the South Asian Me Too movement, especially on this side, I think South Asian American Me Too movement, actually. So I feel like I just rambled, but I think that made sense. That sounded better as it was going. So I'll stick with
Great.
that. I'll end it there.
You were great. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess sort of it's so fascinating to hear everybody like sort of talk about this. I would say for me it almost wasn't like a choice because I think sort of at the time when sort of being involved in feminist organizing, I think around like sort of 2017, 18, it sort of became the vocabulary through which sort of the Me Too movement, through which you would talk about issues of violence and harassment. And I think as like a feminist organizer, it's almost sort of, you cannot not talk about patriarchal violence. And so it was just, it almost wasn't like I don't know, like a conscious choice, even though I would love to say like sort of I got involved because of this and this, and sort of just as organically as like sort of cases started to come up, it became just very urgent to address it. And I think like sort of we were all sort of just reacting to this sort of moment and this sort of overflow of like sort of testimony that was coming out, and you couldn't help but be moved by it and to organize around it. Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing. All of your journeys were so interesting to hear about. And like Maya said, like all from different places, but really, really moved by all the work that you all are doing. So like kind of touching on some things that a few of you mentioned, each journey has its up and downs. So the next question we have for all of you is, what are some of the roadblocks you've seen in your personal advocacy for the South Asian Me Too movement? And how have you overcome them, or how are you overcoming them?
So this is, I'm going first. Sorry, guys. No, so this is, it's a great question. So it's, oh, man, my biggest obstacle so far in trying to implement specifically accountability measures for incidences of sexual and gender-based violence, like to try and enforce and create a structure around it in the volunteer work that I'm doing, is running into a lot of individuals and people in power who kind of invisibly behind the scenes block you from doing stuff. And they block you because they're terrified of liability. They're terrified of like, what if this person comes back against me? What if they retaliate? Like, we don't want to ruin the perpetrator's life. We don't want to ruin the abuser's life. We don't want to do this and that. And so, and these are, and it's an invisible kind of obstacle where their presence in these same individuals who might have publicly advocated for being against sexual violence, might have publicly advocated for being against these things, behind the scenes, they're part of the obstacle. Behind the scenes, these are the people that are kind of in higher positions of power, and they have direct access to be able to implement these kinds of things. And running into that has been a huge thing. And one thing that's extremely distinctive is just how, that's it. So much of the conversation comes back down to liability for a lot of these parties. And it's, if that decision was a little bit clearer and made, then it would be so much easier to implement some level of advocacy. But behind the scenes, and this is specifically like a whole population that might show public advocacy, like might put a stamp on, yes, of course I'm against anti-sexual violence, anti-gender-based violence, but when it comes to expecting accountability, when it's a sister or brother that's the perpetrator, or someone close to them, it changes and it becomes very uncomfortable. And that's been a huge roadblock, trying to get that same level of like commitment to the cause, and that level of that kind of invisible toxicity dismantled has been a huge roadblock that's ongoing, and we haven't found a solution to it. We just kind of keep pushing against it. But that's been the most persistent thing. That's for burnout, for being jaded, a lot of that kind of stuff. And so that for me is definitely one of the bigger, huge roadblocks that I don't think there's a clean solution to universally yet.
I can go next. Speaking about in the context of Dalit women, already being branded, right, as being invisible, being available, polluted, being worthy, not worthy of recognition, but, looked at as polluted bodies, right? So the main obstacles that I have faced in my work with grassroots organizations in India is the minds of Dalit women and girls themselves, and the minds of the dominant caste, right? So because there is an internalization among young Dalit girls that this is what they are meant to be, right? Their bodies are meant to be raped. So they have very sadly accepted that situation, that this is how it is going to be. So that is a major, block in really working with these children and young women who are abused to bring them out of that mentality and say, no, you're not meant to be this way, right? So for young Dalit girls, silence sort of becomes their only protection from further harm. So they're afraid. So that fear is a huge block to have them come out with their stories and to get their permission to go to the police, right? And to represent, their case in the police stations. Most often parents are begging us, saying, do not shame my daughter, right? So that is there as a major obstacle. And then the toxic masculinity, coupled with political power and caste and class power, it is unimaginable, the power that these men hold over these, women who not only live in segregated spaces, but they are pushed to corners where they are helpless. And so when a politician, sends somebody to rape a young Dalit girl to make a statement, right, there is no resource for these people to fight back, right? And so as small grassroots organizations, it is very, very difficult to really fight against these huge, right, overarching power structures. Thank you. I'll stop there.
I'll go next because it's connected to what Roja said. It's the biggest roadblock that there were two roadblocks. One was that the institutions are all really messed up. And, there are laws in place, but they're rarely followed. I mean, the access to justice is so bad that oftentimes when Dalit women go to, make a police complaint, the police is like, sorry, we cannot take your complaint because we can't believe that an untouchable woman would be raped by an upper caste man, because you're untouchable, so they're not supposed to touch you, like, so we don't believe you when you tell us that. Yeah, so once you experience that, you never want to go report your assault again, right? So I think that is a huge roadblock. And even when you do even when you do file a complaint with the police, it's like, what's next? It's like you need to have money and resources to see the case through. And does it even bring healing and trauma to the victim? Is like the carceral system that we have, is it even helping the victims? Because it's re-traumatizing them throughout the entire court process, where they're examined, then they're cross-examined, and then you're put through different medical tests, and then people like argue if if the results are accurate or not, and you're reliving your trauma again and again. And there's often like witness intimidation. So what they do is, if you do file a case, the perpetrator's family and their really powerful networks come to you, they burn your house down, they like harass you at your workplace, and they harass your whole family, and they intimidate you to like stop pursuing your legal like rights. So these are like the biggest roadblocks that I saw. And specifically with universities, it was just that many of the universities didn't even have the committees that they were supposed to have to address, like a complaints committee that they're supposed to have under law. Many of them don't even have those, those committees just don't exist. And even when they do exist in universities, most minority and women from minority communities are not motivated or don't have faith in that institution to to address their concerns there. So these were like the biggest roadblocks.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo what Raya was just saying, sort of about the sort of inability of the legal system to even capture sort of some of these experiences or to even account for some of them. So one of the biggest issues, for example, with the Me Too movement here in Pakistan has been that the definitions in some of the laws, for example, the workplace harassment law, if anybody were to make a complaint regarding that, women who don't work in like a very traditional workplace. So anybody who falls into the informal sector, which is sort of so many women, especially for example working class women, will not have proper contracts for the work that they do. Deliberately they'll be given like 9-month contracts so they don't fall under labor laws. There will be sort of any domestic help and home-based workers. So all of them don't fall under the definition of workplace harassment or workplace. And there's so much sort of ways that sort of the system has made to sort of develop to evade the law as well. Apart from that, I think one of the major issues, and I know this has happened a lot in India as well, because sort of the nature of a Me Too allegation is so sort of visible and it's so public. There are mechanisms. So not only does the law not capture sort of the violence that you're experiencing properly, it also sort of works to actually then criminalize a very sort of person who is speaking. So through defamation laws, and not just civil defamation, I know both in Pakistan and India, at least, like sort of there's criminal defamation. In Pakistan, there are 2 laws that criminalize speech. One of them specific to online spaces, and then generally. And so, sort of, if a lot of times these cases become like sort of people end up withdrawing cases because the law is, instead of being actually used as a space where some sort of remedy or relief is provided, it becomes a space where the same kind of violence is replicated and it's weaponized to sort of silence. So that's been a major issue, and sort of we've dealt with like cases where people have been forced to render public apologies or take back their allegations when after sort of a defamation suit has been filed. And lastly, sort of just building off of what everybody else was saying, sort of the lack of alternative forums for sort of other forms of justice, sort of outside of like sort of this violent system. And attempts at like sort of community forms of like healing or helping sort of survivor centric justice of people just don't have the resources. Like even as like feminist activists, I've seen like sort of we just don't have the bandwidth or the resources to sort of deal with like sort of just the I guess sort of the scale of patriarchal violence that exists. And there's no sort of structure outside of these traditional structures to account for that. So there's also no healing. So I think there's a lot of like sort of pain that sort of has been made visible, but you don't know where to go with it for a lot of times. Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you so much to all of you for helping us recognize the different issues that we need to start focusing on. That was very informative. I want to move on to some of the audience questions to give them a chance to ask. So one of the questions that I have here, which I can paste in the chat for you, is how do you bring up these conversations to conservative people? A lot of the people here in Pakistan are conservative, and the patriarchy is deeply mixed within people themselves. How do you bring into light conversation like these with these kinds of people?
Is that for me or
it's for anyone? You don't have to if you don't want to, but this is a general.
Yeah, I'll just sort of comment if only I knew like sort of properly, but I think this is a big problem in the sense I wouldn't just say conservative, like what the sort of definition of conservative would be. Like I see a lot of like liberal men also. I mean, just take, I mean, the biggest example off the top of my head is just like our dear Prime Minister, who seems to have had like all the education in the world, but still recently made like and this wasn't the first time. I was actually like, when it happened, like the statements that he made about like sort of vulgarity being linked to patriarchal violence. I was just like, he says this all the time, but somehow it became like a big issue this time around. But so I think it's sort of the reaction, at least in sort of, because the question was specifically sort of talking about Pakistan, I sort of, the reaction to the feminist movement in general and the Me Too movement here has been really like sort of, I think has taken a reactionary and a very violent turn, and sort of it is born from this sort of, I think, insecurity with like sort of how uh, it's challenging the status quo. And I think those conversations need to happen, like sort of, I guess like sort of, sometimes the mistake that we make is sometimes the language that we use or the sort of tools that we use are maybe just to don't really like sort of, I guess, give space for that kind of conversation, for people to make mistakes at times, or to sort of really sort of, say stuff that might be considered problematic. Because I think the way that like sort of this conversation has sort of it's become so polarized, and it's sort of just about like sort of, and it's become I think dominated by a few very high profile cases, at least in Pakistan. And it's just become just a matter of whether you think, like, in very crude terms, whether you believe like person A or person B. Whereas like sort of the Me Too movement is much more expansive. It's just, I think, more, certain cases have taken like more sort of taken up more bandwidth or more space within that. But even that isn't like, I think it has become a much more a few years ago you wouldn't see people on primetime television, for example, even using the word harassment. So it has become part of the vocabulary, and I think sort of how to take that forward, it's just to throw constant engagement and not giving up that space, I think. And once these things are normalized, I think, to the person who like sort of asked this question, I would just say, like, sort of don't give up, because at least we're having this conversation. Because I don't think gender was on the sort of table a few years ago, even 5 years ago, in terms of like mainstream conversations.
I'll go next. So the problem is twofold, right? It's on a systemic level, and it's on an individual level in our day-to-day interactions with our family, with our friends. And often a lot of people have conservative family members who are just straight up like racist and casteist, and have like really, fucked up like ideas about the, consent. Right. And it's very difficult to love them as relatives and to have like a healthy relationship with them while they hold these views and you see them act out as well. So it's really, it's not easy to like deal with the interpersonal violence that family members perpetrate. And these are really tough conversations, but on an individual level, everybody should be having these conversations with your racist and casteist and sexist like members of the family. Like, they will be really tough conversations, and it will feel really bad, but it's the work that needs to be done. Because what really perpetuates these systems is just like the impunity with which people operate, right? And if we don't even, put a stop to this in our own families, how can we like do activism outside of that? Like, if we can't even like change things like that are around us. So I think it's really important to have those difficult conversations with your family, and constantly like educating them. And on a systemic level, I feel that India and Pakistan right now are being like dominated by like these right-wing conservative parties, right? And there's like in India, it's like fostering a culture of like misogyny, And, it's like, it's codifying it. And it's also bringing out like a very right-wing, like conservative, like it's encouraging this behavior basically. So on a systemic level, I think to fight this, we need resources, we need funding, right? And we need to fund the people who are already doing the work to fight, this kind of like conservative, like violence. So yeah, I think that's what we can do, and we should like fight really hard to do.
Thank you. I'd like to go next. Thank you for bringing in our Prime Minister into this conversation in India, because we've heard the term orange is the new black. I say like the color of rape is saffron in India, the saffron terror. And we cannot deny the fact, because it is plain and clear that the fundamentalist Hindu ideology has been built upon the bodies of women. Okay, so when we talk about the duality of purity and pollution, that is always the woman, right? The Dalit woman or any other kind of marginalized woman on whose body a particular statement has to be made. So talking to our conservative relatives and family, providing evidence is a very important part of that conversation. And I've realized that, right? Because arguments and debates don't get us anywhere. But when we pull up evidence, right? So if you look at the scriptural narratives, right, that is deeply rooted in Hindu nationalist tradition, you see how, I always look at Shurpanaka and Ramayana as the first Me Too movement woman, who ran to her brother and, lamenting and crying aloud in the forest to say, like, I have been humiliated, I have been mutilated, I have been violated, right? And so there lies the evidence to show that this is the tradition that we are a part of. So this kind of, Brahminical, supremacist attitude that just because a woman, right, is does not belong to my particular identity or does not look like what I look like, right, or what my family looks like, it's okay to perpetrate that violence. So providing that evidence from scriptures. I mean, look at the Manu, right? The very blatant ways in which it dehumanizes the body of women, Dalit women. And so therefore, if you're not considered to be human, then raping is not violence at all, right? It's not rape at all because they're not bodies, right? So that's the kind of evidence we need to provide. And then to show, like, yes, look at historically. There is historical invisibility, right? So I talked about scriptural invisibility. Then you have historical invisibility. I mean, look at our own Dr. Ambedkar and Gandhi, right? So we know that any college classroom we enter in the United States, or even in India for that matter, I think people know Gandhi everywhere. Nobody knows about Ambedkar, right? It's like Ambedkar is standing in the back and saying, me too, right? I'm here too, right? So that aspect of invisibility, again, is historically rooted for us amongst marginalized communities. Those are the evidence we need to produce. And then to say legal invisibility, right? So look at the ways in which the law is so manipulative, right? I recently watched Confirmation. If you haven't seen it, it's so powerful. I knew the story about Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, who was a law professor in Oklahoma, who brings up this sexual assault, sexual harassment case against Clarence Thomas, who's the nominee for the Supreme Court Justice, right? And he's a Black conservative person. And so looking at how this highly educated woman couldn't really fight the structure, right? And finally, she had to give up. She pulls out because she's like, this is crazy. The way people are manipulating words, manipulating law. And as we speak, what is happening to George Floyd's case, right? People, highly educated people, know how to manipulate, right, the system. So providing those kinds of evidence, I think, and to have these very intelligent conversations with lived experiences that people cannot really question. I mean, look at what happened in Hathras, right? So how can they even argue right, further on cases like that. So providing evidence, I think, is a very good way of talking to our dear conservative family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. If you wanted to add something, you can go ahead.
Vikash,
was
maybe
me.
you go next.
Yeah, I'm thinking, sorry. So because I genuinely feel unqualified to comment on this nearly as well as my peers have, but mostly because most of what I've experienced is from South Asian American movements. But actually, what Roja was saying when she mentioned Gandhi is something that I've thought about. How well invoked his name is, how people, I mean, you know, he has the quote, be the change you wish to see in the world. And like, there's a genuine kind of purity that comes out of it. But then, you know, some of the lesser known stuff like his celibacy tests with Manu and that is such a big thing that a lot of people don't know about. I'm going to butcher it in delivery, but essentially he had the celibacy test where he was like laying with a bed of women and laying with his grandniece to test like his sexual desire. And because he was laying with, he was like 70 at the time that this happened. He was 70, she was 18, something like that. And when he laid with her, the fact that he did not have sex with her or didn't engage with her was supposed to be this grand gesture of celibacy and purity and how great of a man he was. And this is the figure who, despite all the purity and stuff associated with him, this has never been in the same level of public light that the rest of his stuff has been. That same level of criticism hasn't been there. And that I think ties so well to, you know, to everyone's point so far, just how based in like this Hindu fundamentalist ideology, it really is built on a lot of invisibility, a lot of lies, a lot of women that have been taken advantage of, murdered, raped, all of that. And so the thing that comes to mind directly in the conversation, so that's what I was marinating on when Oja was mentioning that. But the thing that ties that into this conversation for me is like this question is two things. One, that there's a system in place, like where I think Gandhi is a very good epitome of this, of a lot of figures that have a lot of ideologies that have been publicized as these glorious, pure things that are actually just enabling more toxic masculinity, enabling more of the same, the more of the worst. And a lot of these individuals that I've encountered idolize those things. And it's like, you can't touch Gandhi, right? It's an idol. You can't critique him. It's like defamation of some kind when it's all truthful. And then it becomes really hard to even have the conversation. But the biggest thing I think that contributes to being able to have the conversation is acknowledging that whenever we do have a conversation with someone that believes these things, they dismantling these ideals that they've had for years and privileged off of, benefited off of for years, is an extremely uncomfortable experience for the person that has to go through that, right? And so we have, unfortunately, and I have to disclaimer, unfortunately, I think the onus of having to be the better person of letting them go through that discomfort. Because if we don't, then the anger that we very naturally and validly feel whenever people express their beliefs is going to shut down their ability to change for the better, since it's not an overnight thing and it's not something that can happen very quickly. Unfortunately, whenever somebody is open to a conversation, whenever the onus comes out, and specifically people that have these ideologies dedicated to unfortunate enabling of these toxic ideals, whenever that opportunity shows up, it has to be a gradual process met with a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, a lot of, well, at least clinically, validating their outlook and how it's changing, even though it's like you have to deal with a lot of toxicity along the way as they continue to change their mind. And that is a very, very large task for one person, let alone a bunch of people. But for it to be effective, from what I found, for it to be effective, in order to engage that conversation, the person engaging has to have a lot of patience, a lot of understanding that for the person that they're talking to, they are unfortunately going to take some, they have to go through this entire process of discomfort. And it's horrible, honestly. It's horrible that that even has to happen. It's horrible that it has to get to that point. And that's distinctive from systemic, so that's an individual level. The systemic one, like the change, is the exact opposite. Like that needs to happen now. Like that needs to happen tomorrow. And there's no room for people messing that up. And for those ideals to penetrate that sphere of things. but on the individual level, like a family member, that kind of thing, the thing that has been the most uncomfortable and the hardest to understand for me personally, and I still struggle with this. This is not, this is not something that's very easy, is having to let the person change and giving that space permission to happen, instead of immediate anger and immediate shutdown that will probably just continue to enable that same ideal. Yeah, I feel like I was rambling again, but yeah, that's what I'm going with.
I'm going to quickly add and say, we need to make our conservative friends read Raya Sarkar's article in the Indian Express. That'll make them shut up.
I would also want, I just want to add that in America, we see, Deb Haaland was recently, it has been recently sworn in as the, Minister of the Interior, right? And she, right after taking office, and she's the first Native American woman to hold this kind of office, and she, after taking office, created a department in the Department of Interior that's called the Office of Missing and Murdered Women, Indigenous women. And I thought that was phenomenal, because this is such an invisibilized thing that happens in the US. Nobody talks about it, but it's like when you elect somebody or when you appoint somebody from that community with those politics, then you're able to do like things at an institutional level that is not possible by simply grassroots activism and lobbying. So it is so important to encourage and to support women, and especially Dalit women who are running for office in the US and also in India. There are a lot of Dalit women who live in the US as well, like myself. And in India too, we need to give them our resources. We need to get involved in our local, be more involved in our local politics, and, support these people with our resources, with money, with our time, with volunteering, whatever, however you can, help. I think that's super important.
Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your thoughts on this. I think it's been a crazy year where a lot of us have had difficult conversations with people and didn't really know how to deal with them, and knowing that we have to be the bigger person and have patience with them is definitely a big tool in fighting this movement.
Can I just, Maya, sorry to interrupt, can I just follow up with a comment to what Raya just said?
Go ahead.
So, thank you, Raya, for saying that. Look at how much money goes into funding the RSS in India. Okay. It is appalling. From here, money going from the United States to there, right? So, point well taken, Raya. We need to really garner support for us in terms of numbers of people and finance as well, so that we can really, create, and not just create, but really sustain this momentum, this energy, this counter narrative that, that we as historically marginalized women need to provide. So thank you for saying that.
Okay. This next question is from the audience, and it's specifically directed for Vikash. The participant asks, how can we support men of color to feel empowered to engage in domestic violence advocacy and resources, especially for young men of color?
Yeah, so that, I have a twofold answer to that, and a lot of it's fueled from personal experience and also just what I've seen in my work. So this is one of those things that I think is kind of this is a really, really hard line to that's a hard thing to communicate. So the first thing is to be able to do it properly without compromising. No, let me restart that. One of the primary motivating factors to be able to empower and support that, I think a lot of it does have to come from other men who are in the work primarily, because which is hard because there's already so few that are present and exist. But the biggest answer that I can have for that, to support that, is just to honestly continue with the same level of conversations that have been happening already. And there very much already is a movement of men of color slowly kind of getting their way in, and it's a change that's happening. So just having these spaces, having inclusive spaces of like acknowledgement of when that happens, and specifically for men that are in the space, I think there's an obligation for men that are allies of this movement, for men that are there, to go more out of their way than than you would expect from anyone else to reach and create those spaces. Because as soon as they do, there's going to be way more men. So if non-male presenting or non-male identifying wants to encourage that conversation, my honest feedback would be to pair up, find, advocate for men that are either already allies or already kind of creating these movements, to actively get them to create these spaces for other men who are either just getting first exposed to it or haven't been in it yet. Because I think the primary push for this, for it to be effective and efficient, really is going to be to ally with and get more men on board. But the movement, I think a lot of it has to be primarily done by men that are either present as allies. And I mean, I just, even in this panel or in this chat, I'm just seeing a lot of names, a lot of he, him identifiers, and like, these are the people that I think that this is where a lot of the onus falls on. They have to create that space and they have to make that forward. And for female and identifying presence, to ally with them, but also to push that they are the primary respondents of that space, because it's just, that relatability, that being seen, seems like it's very effective to have men of color feel empowered to engage in that level of advocacy. So that would be my primary feedback for that, is to push in that direction. And the secondary feedback for that is also because I think that will kind of start dismantling what masculinity is supposed to look like. So because right now the large ideals of what mask presenting men are is very, very heavily integrated with toxic masculinity behaviors, ideals, etc. So having men start this space and having men really be able to push it, like healthy presenting, healthy masculine, redefining the idea of what masculine is supposed to be, what being a male and being a man is supposed to be, that being seen, that being presented, is going to create that in such a very necessary wavelength, like very outreach kind of way, that I think is very efficient, very much present, very much needed. So yeah, all of this is the scenic route to basically say, like, men need to be, they have to put the onus on them to start that and to encourage that, to do that. It's like, and if you are an ally, if you present as that, then this would be a great place to put a lot of that energy, because it helps a lot to be able to help with that, and to get those allies specifically to also start dismantling all of the integrated toxic masculinity that is just what so much of this movement is about, is a very necessary angle that this needs to happen in a bit more, I think. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Vikash.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Vanya, I just wanted to mention there is a documentary called Tough Guys, Guise. It is phenomenal in terms of educating ourselves as folks living in America, and the ways in which this toxic masculinity that was just mentioned has just permeated into the minds of little, boys and girls and all other gender identities, is the primary reason why we see so much of sexual violence around us. So check that out. It's really amazing, that documentary.
Thank you so much, Vikash, for such an insightful answer and help into kind of understanding. Ryle, go ahead if you'd like to add, please.
Yeah, I would also love to add that it's super important to kind of like indoctrinate the kids young, that's it's very helpful when, I think it would be really great if, like, all South Asian parents started having these conversations with their children when they're young. And for that to happen, I think we need to kind of train the parents on what to say, how to approach these issues. Like, a lot of parents don't even know how to, like, bring up things like this because it's so taboo to talk about any of this. Right, so we definitely need more resources for parents to have like conversations with their kids about like tough issues from a young age, about consent from a really young age. I think that is like very key to kind of to kind of create human beings who will be good allies in the future. Yeah, that's
Great.
mine.
Thank you all. No, this was really good to hear about. And again, the importance of allyship as well has been really important for us to discuss. So I think we all learned a lot from all of your responses. I think we may have one last question before we move into our icebreakers. And this one is like more like specific for Shmyla, but of course anyone can answer after that as well. The question is, what is different about Pakistan's women's marches versus marches in other South Asian countries or the US? I think maybe just touching on kind of those differences.
Yeah, that's I've been thinking about this question since you guys sent it to us. I think sort of at least sort of the march in the US, like that's I don't necessarily see like the march that we have in conversation with that, or sort of having the same politics as that. I sort of see sort of the Aurat March, even though it sort of bears a similar name, I think as a sort of continuation of the same sort of history of feminist organizing that has actually happened even in South Asia, and specifically, I guess, sort of in direct conversation with the marches or the forms of organizing and protesting that has happened before in Pakistan. And I think sort of but I think the primary sort of differences that I see are there is a lot of sort of the same kind of tools that the marches use or sort of feminist movements use all around the world are now becoming very similar. So the use of social media, for example, to organize, a lot of the same, sort of even our understandings of feminism or like sort of come from intersectional feminists from all around the world, especially sort of women of color, Black feminists. So there's a lot of borrowing of the sort of same sort of critical feminism, but there's still, I would say like sort of there is still like sort of the confrontation with the state is very different than it is maybe in the US, because for a long, like sort of the Women's March in the US like sort of was within a particular context, for example, like sort of responding to the election of Trump and, the sort of rhetoric that he had towards women. Whereas sort of, I would say like sort of the understanding at least of the patriarchal state amongst sort of feminists here is much broader, because than maybe individuals. And I think sort of the history of like sort of, for example, the different forms that the state has taken throughout its history. So for example, like in the 80s, the way that sort of the feminist movement responded to the military dictatorship, for example, they were on the front lines sort of, I think actually much more than men, sort of actively resisting and putting their bodies in the street to sort of resist the kind of sort of discriminatory and patriarchal laws that they had. Even now, sort of the backlash to this year's Aurat March, for instance, is both sort of a very patriarchal sort of a response to sort of, this typical sort of patriarchal response, but it's also coming from the state, because the marches have raised issues of, for example, enforced disappearances, of the kind of violence that the military has done in the past, and continues to inflict on women, and that kind of sort of, I think, that opposition to the state, I think, is very particular, maybe. And there's probably more similarities to the kind of opposition that now the Indian feminist movement has to mount against sort of the sort of fascist state, and the sort of form that the state has taken in Pakistan has been very sort of particular, tied to sort of military takeovers, but also very sort of, even when it's not been directly military rule, like has always, that specter has always been at the back. And the way that sort of, sort of, I think the feminist movement inevitably after a while has to sort of grapple with that larger question of like sort of, what does state violence that can be patriarchal, capitalistic, what does that mean, and how to address it, because you sort of hit a brick wall after a while. And I think some of the similarities that I see with sort of larger other marches is sort of this turn towards sort of talking about sexuality is sort of new, and I think that sort of is in conversation with the larger sort of a movement. And that's something that even sort of older feminists here sort of say that it's not something that we were addressing directly. And even though it's still very difficult to do and it sort of garners a lot of backlash, I think that's sort of something that we've learned and been in conversation with, and sort of part of like this I hate to sort of categorize feminism in waves, because it's a very typical and sort of Western centric way of looking at it. But there is this sort of, I think the conversation has become much more to the fore, and it's sort of not just like sort of in terms of queer politics, but even sort of women asserting their sexuality, because even that is like such something that is so deeply upsetting. And I think just the sort of kind of backlash, I think, is, I don't know, like obviously it's always different everywhere, but like here, like the sort of day-to-day sort of problems are like, do I have to go underground and like will I be alive like if I do this? So whereas like there is, I think sort of that at least, I don't know, like that existential or sort of I think how vulnerable your bodies are in the street is a very sort of, I feel like if I explain it to someone from like India, they would understand it much more than like sort of, or maybe if I sort of explain it to Black bodies or like sort of minority bodies in the US, that's something that they would understand much more than maybe the mainstream feminist movement or people who are at the sort of leadership front of it. Like I don't think that kind of vulnerability is experienced, and I think that does inform then the substance of your politics as well, because if you are constantly scared and like your body itself is vulnerable, I think that substantially sort of changes how you articulate how urgent your politics is, like how you don't have time for bullshit or like sort of and sort of that larger stuff. So I think there's definitely like sort of borrowing and like sort of sometimes the movement here, and I'm sorry it's such a long-winded answer, but like sometimes a lot of times like sort of the accusation of like Westernization is sort of the primary tactic to discredit the movement here. So I think the major sort of last year, at least, like the biggest issue that people had was like the slogan "Mera Jism Meri Marzi," which was sort of a translation of like sort of my body, my choice. And people were like, a lot of people had like other problems with it. There was vulgar and like too crude. And one of the accusations was, it's a translation of like a Western slogan. So how dare you? And but I think like sort of while that conversation and link is there, like it's a lot more, I think, grounded in sort of like I know that like even abortion activists in the US, like the kind of they do experience violence and things like that, but like here the conversation is like, how could you even say the word body? Like it's inherently vulgar. So the level of discourse is just, you're just like I mean we haven't even sort of sometimes you so I guess like sort of in a weird way, like there is that obviously that connection. And I think sometimes like sort of I feel like we are very guarded about any kind of like sort of conversation or like sort of I guess, solidarity building, because we're so conscious of that label that is used to discredit us. But I think that's something that we really need to work on as well, because those similarities do exist, and those sort of maybe roots, sort of forms of solidarity also exist. But and we need to maybe ponder more about like sort of how we are connected as well, while sort of recognizing those differences. So yeah, sorry, it wasn't articulate answer, but I just, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our panel, but there is an event right after this related to this panel as a debrief for it. It is the icebreaker event. Sakith just dropped that in the chat, so feel free to join that once you leave this Zoom meeting. Thank you again so much to all of our panelists for sharing your experiences and your wisdom today. We really appreciate you coming out here on Zoom, and your work is truly inspiring, and I know that it impacted our participants as much as it impacted me today.
Yeah, we really wish this panel could be longer because we've learned so much from all of you, and we wish we could still keep asking questions. But yeah, on behalf of the entire SAYI team, all of our participants, thank you so much. All participants, please join us in thanking our panelists today. So yeah, please head over, participants, to the icebreaker that Sakith has just put in the group chat, in the Zoom chat. And then our next panel is at 3 p.m. Eastern time, the South Asian American Studies, same Zoom link. So thank you all so much for joining today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great talking to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.